smartphone and I know how to use it. You're at the Genesee Valley chapter meeting of the Adirondack Mountain Club. Hopefully that you know that and you're happy to be here. I'm Dave Nichols. I'm the chair of the local chapter, and I'm really glad to see all of you out here tonight. We're going to have just a few announcements first. It doesn't look like we have very many announcements because usually there are people standing who want to make those announcements. So we're going to be short this time. Oh, Sarah's getting up.
I didn't want to be first.
You're welcome to be. I'm just going to ask everyone to think about your cell phones. And you want to think about it to make sure they're silent, please. We just want to be respectful to our neighbors. The other thing to be mindful of is the exits. They're behind you, just in case we need them. We've never had, but you never know. So let me make a couple of announcements. Is that okay? My first announcement is that we are amongst a celebrity. I don't know how many of you are 46ers and belong to the 46er Club. If you do, you get this Adirondack Peaks magazine. And if you recently got one and you opened it up, you'll notice that Cindy Halpern has an article in the magazine. Cindy, great article. And congratulations on being a 46er. The second announcement is that we have openings within the chapter. We are an all-volunteer group. Nothing gets done but by volunteers. We have an opening for a family chair. We have an opening for a vice chair who fills in when I'm not around. And we have an opening for a young members chair. So if you're interested in that position, or you know of someone that you could nudge into that position, let me know. I'm more than willing to do the nudging if needed. Next up, I think I'll let Sarah talk.
Hello everyone, I'm Sarah Mastro. I am the Expo Chair, and I just wanted to remind everyone that we are still looking for a volunteer coordinator for the event this year. So again, I can nudge someone. If you have any suggestions, see me after the program or give me a call or shoot me an email. That person would kind of gather volunteers as we get closer to the event, schedule them for their time slots and into their areas of interest, and then coordinate the day of to assign floaters where necessary. So if you have any questions or know someone that would be great at that, let me know.
Thanks, Sarah. Two more announcements. One is that our chapter maintains about 6 miles of the Finger Lakes Trail, which is also part of the North Country National Scenic Trail system. We have maintenance days scheduled for April 1st, I gotta look at my notes, June 3rd and September 30th. Now, I don't see any of you reaching to your phones to write on your calendar that you plan on working those. So you guys all have fantastic memories, right? If you're interested in helping us out, you can contact Beth Wheeler. She's the steward for our section, and let her know that you'd love to help out. I have helped out, and it's really a lot of fun. And it's great to help maintain such a wonderful trail system within New York. The dates again are, thank you, Jill. The dates again are April 1st, these are Saturdays, April 1st, June 3rd, and September 30th.
I think they're on the calendar too, are they?
And very good, Reinhardt. They are also on the calendar and the ADK GVC website, along with all the hikes and paddles and everything else that the chapter puts out. Jackson.
I'm up. Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody! How many of you, please raise your hand if you've been to one of these meeting programs at least once since September? Raise your hand. That's good. So for all of you who just raise your hand, you can turn off your hearing for a moment. Because, ta-da! Those people know what this is. So this is the drinking cup that was left at the June program, and I'm still trying to find the owner. And of course, we're going to do this 4 more times until we get to June.
Maybe even raffle it off.
That's a possibility. I don't know, Tom, you want to start the bidding?
I'll do it for you.
Okay. Yeah, good. So, bookstore, obviously, if you've never stopped over to examine merchandise, has things other than just books and maps and guidebooks. Decals and anything else that you might want to take on the trail with you, stop over and see me after the program. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackson. Just before we introduce our speaker, I wanted to just find out how many people saw the GVC ad for the program tonight in the city newspaper. Could you raise your hands? Oh, good. Now, how many are here because they saw the ad? Great. Well, welcome. Glad you could make it. Okay, Katie, where are you? Oh! Katie will introduce our speaker.
Thank you for doing that. City plug. I was also wondering if how many people are here because they saw the Facebook posts. Great. Okay. Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming out tonight. I'd like to introduce our presenter tonight is Jeffrey Mead. Jeffrey and 5 of his partners paddled the remote Hart River last summer on a 3-week self-guided tour in the Yukon territory. And he's here to show us lots of pictures and tell us stories about that trip. And before you come up here, I just want to plug our March 8th presentation. I can't remember who's doing the workshop. Where's Bruce? Oh, you are doing the workshop next month too? Okay, so Astronomy Part 2 next month. And Serge Losa, if you could raise your hand, Serge is going to speak about ice climbing next month. So we hope you come back. And here is Jeffrey Mead.
Thanks. I'm not used to holding this microphone, so it's proximity based. If I don't have it close enough, please yell out, louder! And I'll get it back close. So thank you for having me here tonight. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you to the club for having me and for all of you for coming out and joining me. I'm going to share some of the stunning beauty of the Yukon and tell you about our 3-week paddle there.
Jeff, I hate to interrupt you, and this is a little obnoxious, but we have many members who are hard of hearing, and so we might not have covered this with you, but as uncomfortable as you are with the microphone, if you could hold it really close, it will sound really loud to you, but that way the people in the audience will hear you. And we want that to happen.
Okay. How's that? Is that good? All right. Thank you, Jill. I really appreciate that because that was the feedback I needed. All right. Yes, it does sound a little loud to me. All right. So I'm going to begin with something that the first time I heard one of these, it sounded a little odd to me, but it was at the Wilderness Canoe Symposium in Canada, and it's a land acknowledgement. The land acknowledgement is a powerful way for non-Indigenous communities to show respect for and honor the Indigenous peoples on the land which we live and work. So I will first quote from the Rochester Museum and Science Center's website. RMSC sits on the unceded land of the Onondaga, or Seneca people, of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy. RMSC acknowledges that it was founded on the displacement, exclusion, and erasure of indigenous peoples, including those on whose land its institution is located. This acknowledgement is one small step in the process of dismantling the unjust legacies of colonialism and honoring Seneca and Haudenosaunee communities, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. And now to the rivers on which we paddled last summer. The Hart and Peel River watersheds are not a wilderness, but an ancestral homeland of the Tetli-Wet'chen, Trondak-Wet'chen, and Nacho-Nyack Dune First Nations. In 1993, their elders negotiated a landmark treaty that covers both resources and culture. This agreement gave their nations self-governance and the basis to join Canadian Parks and Wilderness and the Yukon Conservation Societies to force the protection of the Peel River watershed. They fought for this all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada and won. As of 2019, 83% of the Yukon portion of the Peel watershed is now protected. This area is larger than Banff and Yellowstone National Parks combined. For these elders, their work, the preservation of the land, and our access to it, I am grateful. The Peel River watershed is about 30,000 square miles. It's the gray portion above. There was a laser pointer, I don't know where it is. And it's about 2/3 of the size of New York State. Most of the watershed is still free of industrial development. Now I'd like to share a little bit about the Wet'chen people, abbreviated from their social and cultural website. We are one of the most northerly indigenous peoples on the North American continent, living at the northwestern limits of the boreal forest. Only the Inuit live further north. At the time of contact with Euro-Canadians, we lived in 9 different bands with lands stretching from the interior of Alaska through the Yukon and into the Mackenzie Valley. We now live primarily in 15 communities in the Yukon and Northwest Territories. We maintain close cultural and family ties, and together we total over 6,000 people. Many families still maintain summer and winter camps outside our communities. Hunting, fishing, and trapping remain important both culturally and economically, with caribou, moose, and whitefish being staples of our diet. So, into this great land and history, we launch a 20-day canoe trip. Now for our story and a little bit about what it takes. Most importantly, it takes a great group of people. On the left, we have Matt and Terry from Naples, New York. Terry is here with us tonight. You might get to talk with her afterwards. Behind me is Isadora from Hamilton, Ontario, our fearless leader and trip organizer. And next to her, her paddling partner, Rob from Ottawa. And behind me, my life partner and paddling partner, Pamela from Silver Spring, Maryland. There were 5 of us making photographs on this trip. We used 4 cell phone cameras, 3 GoPros, 2 high-end digital cameras, 2 point-and-shoot cameras, and Rob's drone. And we shared all of our photographs afterwards. Let me say there are a lot to choose from. They are not in chronological order, the photographs. And I do want to give the best photo credits to Rob, whose eye is superb, especially for landscapes. So another thing it takes is a lot of gear. Most of the gear we used was our own, but we rented canoes and peripherals from an outfitter in Whitehorse, Yukon. It takes a lot of food, 6 people, 20 days, 5 60-liter barrels of food to be exact. And finally, it takes a lot of logistical coordination. With months of planning and preparation, we began by staying overnight at Isadora's house in Hamilton, and her father very generously agreed to offered to schlep us to the airport in his minivan and trailer, with all of our gear in tow. So getting there, this is a view of where we are now, the Museum and Science Center, and this is our trip going 150 miles to Toronto and then flying 2,500 miles to Whitehorse, Yukon, which is just a little east of Skagway, Alaska. Whitehorse has about 44,000 people. It's a really nice little city, very international, people from all over the world there. And we spent 2 days there in an Airbnb, gathering our final provisions and meeting with the outfitter and doing our final packing. Then we had a 250-mile ride in the van up to Mayo by the outfitter, getting us in our canoes up there for our 63-mile bush plane ride flight to Elliott Lake. So this is in Mayo. Mayo is a town of about 450 or so people, and this is its charming airport. This is the headquarters and the control tower of the airport, and the maintenance farm of the airport. This is airport parking, and the facilities should you need to relieve yourself. You could camp there before or after your trip, and we did afterwards. And should you care to take a shower, this is available for $5 a shower. This is inside the headquarters and control tower where you pay your final air bill. And this is what happens before you can load the plane. The big weigh-in. The payload may not exceed 2,400 pounds. And when you total up 6 people, 3 canoes, all of their gear, and 22 days worth of food, it gets very tight. And if you are overweight, you have to leave whatever it takes in the airport until you get down to weight. So they put you in they put all the gear in a cage and weigh it, and then they put all the people in the cage and weigh that too. Fortunately, we didn't have to do that. It's hard to pack lightly enough, and I'm not known for packing lightly. That's my gear list. But we were fortunate. We were underweight enough on the gear that they didn't even bother to put us in the cage and weigh us. So then it's time to load the plane. This was the previous party taking off. We ended up actually in 2 planes. We were supposed to be in 1, but for logistical reasons, I don't know what the complication was. They put us in 2.
All right, here we go.
All right, here we come. Good.
I will have to say, Pam, who was also with us tonight, is such a good sport about that shot being in there. She does not like small planes. So there we are. It's an interesting feeling watching the plane, what feels like your last contact with civilization leaving. But you can't dwell on that because you've got things to do. Let's see if I can turn this on. Doesn't really matter. So the canoe on the far left there that you can see in the background is actually 2 canoes because one was disassembled, so one other one could be nested inside of it. That's how you do the canoes on the pontoon. So that has to be taken apart and reassembled. And we have to find our campsite, and there are lots of things to be done. Now, if we were around here or in Ontario, we might be running out of daylight, but there, it never got dark. It was a team effort, everything is. So we ended up finding our campsite, getting our canoes assembled. Finding the campsite wasn't terribly easy. It was It's a very little used river. Some of the rivers up there are traveled heavily. This one is traveled very lightly. I think only a couple of groups had been by there before we had that summer. So this is our rain tarp / community center. Sometimes we put it up with screens on the side for bugs, but we didn't have to do that too often. And this is our first campsite. It was cool and rainy on and off, maybe 50s or so in the daytime, 40s at night. I believe one night we had frost. This is a Google Earth animation that will show you a little bit about the route and flying down through the valley. The valley we're paddling through, a little flyover. So this is Elliott Creek. You can see where the river is coming in from the screen right. That's the Hart River. So we began on Elliott Creek. We started on Elliott Lake where we landed and then paddled down Elliott Creek for about 15.5 miles. And it's very windy and twisting, and so is the Hart River. And you can see as we get down the Hart River here, it gets to be very braided. You can see how it divides into many braids, and it's interesting to try and choose the correct one to go down because you really don't know which is going to be the best until you're there, and it may or may not have been the best. So we're about to paddle our first day, and the 15.5 miles on Elliott Creek may or may not be paddleable. It's very shallow, and if you go too early in the season, you can't land on Elliott Lake because it still has ice on it, and if you go much later, then you may run out of water and you might have to drag a lot or in some cases walk 15 miles down the dry creek bed. So it can be a real slog, and it's not easy to time it. You have to, do your best and also get a little lucky. We heard about one party that was actually helicoptered out at fairly great expense, I'm sure. So we had a little bit of lining like this, but not an awful lot. So I've heard that if you want to know if a relationship is strong enough to get married, a couple should take a canoe trip first.
Okay, we're good. No reason to go fast here. Just keep us to the left. Back paddle a little. We're good, that's good. All right, and now paddle a little harder and cut us. All right, draw. All right, there we go. Not as elegantly as we wanted, but we got through.
So I can attest the fact that couples taking a canoe trip together is a good idea, and we're still together and planning a wedding. So we're now about to leave Elliott Creek. We were very fortunate and were able to paddle down it in 2 days. We now will be going about 155 miles down the Hart River. The last part will be about 19 miles down the Peel River. So when you're going down these rivers and creeks, you can't see around the corners. It's very little ability to scout on some of them, and the water's moving very fast, typically about 10 kilometers an hour up there. There are sweepers that go across the river because the water carves away at the shore and trees fall, and you have to be very careful to avoid them because they're dangerous. They can knock you out of your boat, they can injure you, or worse, they can trap and drown you. So sometimes we were able to get around them, sometimes we had to cut them out of our way. You can see here how swift the water is and a little bit of its power. So this is our campsite on day 7. We decided to call it an early day after having had a close call with a sweeper, in which case we had to paddle back upstream, and a boat got swamped, and a paddle got lost, and it was an interesting afternoon. So anyway, we were able to retrieve the paddle, fortunately, and nothing bad happened. This is our very nice campsite. And we were blessed with steady sunshine for quite a while after that, on day 7, and a double rainbow. We actually saw a number of double rainbows on the trip. And then, after dinner, we saw a moose. This was the only moose we saw on the trip. And although we know that there is a herd of woodland caribou in the Hart River Basin, we did not see any of those. We also never saw any grizzly, although we know that they're there in the area quite a lot too. We saw some of their footprints. There are brown bear, wolverines, wolves, lynx, dull, sheep, eagles, and peregrines there as well. So this gives you an idea of the speed of the Hart River and how fast you can go without even paddling. Which is wonderful when you're out in the open, and very interesting when you're in the windy, twisty sections. It made for a lot of fun. Lunch spots and campsites were very easy to come by, usually gravel bars, sometimes up in the woods. A group of 6 people and 3 tandems is a really good choice of size. The size means that it's safer than smaller groups if something goes wrong. It's also a good size for finding campsites. Makes it simpler for logistics. You have less tents to find room for. It's a good size for consensus decision making. And it also happens to be the most economical group number for dividing bush plane costs. So we would typically converse about what we wanted to do when, and in terms of resting and paddling and lunch and all that. We had about 13 campsites over 12 days of paddling, and 6 rest or hike days, and 2 days for arrival and departure. We could have done it in fewer days, like maybe 14 instead of 20, but why would we? We paddled 190 miles, about 16 miles a day average, ranging between 8 and 30 miles a day. And we had a very flexible schedule. We basically backed time from our end date when we knew the bush plane would pick us up, and made our communal decisions as to whether to paddle or rest or hike, depending on the weather and how we felt any given day. We were typically up at 8 or 9 in the morning and on the river at 10 or 11, so we did have a pretty leisurely, after all, it was also a vacation. So you can paddle these rivers with tripping companies and take guided trips, or you can do them self-guided. We chose self-guided. One of my favorite things on the trip was watching the play of light and shadow, and how much it changed the landscape and how beautiful it was and how different. So over the next 4 images, which were taken of a similar place, similar views of the same place, look how much the light changes how the landscape looks. It's really quite magical. And here are some of the rock crenellations that look like turrets of castles. There were many thousands of those. And this just recalls to me the zen of being there. No outside distractions, no pressing schedules, just be here now. We found some of our campsites by previous paddlers' notes or GPS waypoints. Most of them we chose as we went through the trip, just doing what I call campsite shopping. We would feel like it was time to end our day, and we'd stop, and some or all of us would get out of the canoes and then walk around and try and check all the boxes. Is the site dry? Is there room enough? Does it have firewood? Are there no bear prints? And how is the view? Here's another example of the light playing on the landscapes and how different they look from minute to minute. This would be a typical lunch spot view. This was a favorite campsite where we got to watch a pair of peregrines playing. This is a shot of one of them. And they just flew for a couple of hours while we watched. So we used the Wild Rivers of the Yukon's Peel Watershed guidebook by Juri Pepre and Sarah Locke. It provided invaluable information and description of the paddling route and lots of incredible background information. We also used GPS waypoints from previous paddlers, and I'll just read you a condensed description of the river from the guidebook. The Hart River is Class 2 overall, with 4 Class 3 rapids at medium or higher water. We figured we had medium water. The Whitewater fun begins in earnest after you reach the Peel River. Expect fairly intense whitewater paddling, scouting, lining, and possibly a few liftovers or short portages. Powerful and high-volume currents, big ledges, holes, and thundering chutes merit your full attention. One long stretch of Class 3 whitewater with Class 4 holes in midstream is followed by 2 long sets of demanding Class 3 and Class 3 plus rapids, depending on water level. So we had a really good description of the route. We used CalTopo as our mapping source, and it's a website that you can go anywhere in the world and look at and create maps and add all kinds of detail to them. So here I added waypoints for every kilometer along the route so we would always know where we were, as well as our possible campsites based on previous people's notes, and a number of hikes that had been recommended by people in previous years, and also where the big whitewater would be. So we had warning in advance, about where the big rapids would be, and probably most importantly was exactly where the bush plane was going to pick us up, because we don't want to be downriver of that and then have to somehow get back upriver. That would be not fun. We also printed and laminated maps, which is always a must. So we also used the Garmin's for navigation. And while phones have a nicer interface and are more pleasant to use that way, they're not nearly as rugged and they use a lot more battery. So we used these 2 Garmin devices. The one on the left is an inReach device, so we could send out an email via satellite at the end of each day saying to a group of people that were expecting our emails, yes, we're safe, or we're fine, we had a great day. The Garmin in the middle we used for navigation, and then the power packs to recharge everything, cameras and such. So we put on the spray skirts for roughly the last third of the Hart River. The spray decks help keep the canoe from getting swamped in the bigger rapids.
There's a nice line right there. It's a rock and roller. Here we go. Yeah. Yeah, baby. after we get through this, unless we can just punch through it. Okay, paddle line held.
Next punch. Hard. Keep going.
All right, nicely done. Keep paddling hard. Yeah, baby. All right, first time. Yeah.
There's a really sharp drop here with very little water. Looks like we're gonna have to line this one. You can see roughly in the middle where you put where the wave trail is and that rock. With those two reference points on the center left.
There we go. Paddle, paddle, paddle. You're doing great, you're doing great. Got it, got it. Yeah, here we go. Thank you.
I think the ones in there, the big ones, they're kind of tilted at an angle. I think that could roll you. Let's take a look at the one down there and make sure that one's actually doable.
Okay, here we go. Are they ending out or what? What is going on? Is that a ledge? All right, we're gonna go left of this stuff. We're gonna go straight down the middle. Don't hold the gun. Don't hold the gun. All right, here we are, back in the saddle again. Sunny August afternoon. Well, yeah, you know, it's fine to dump. I don't mind dumping. It happens. I just don't want to dump in the beginning of a half-mile run of Class 3 Whitewater.
Well,
we were actually very fortunate in that we came out to this large, fairly slow-moving pool after that, so we were okay. And it was very good that Matt and Terry were behind us and able to catch up to Pam and rescue her, because she was not able to get out of the current very easily. And this is our yard sale after dumping in the boat. Actually, it's not really. A yard sale is when you lose everything and you're trying to collect it downriver. Everything stayed in the boat because of the skirt. And fortunately, it did stay dry inside the dry bags, so we were really lucky. Camp life was great. And with a lot of focus on food, especially Isadora loving to catch the grayling that she caught a lot of. But not clean. Matt did all the cleaning, but Isa was all about the cooking and the presentation. We cooked on a twig stove as well as 2 MSR white gas stoves and wood fires. And we used felt cozies to conserve fuel and keep our food warm. That is quite a fire you got going there, Terry.
We're all warming our hands around it.
I lit the fire. Bob and I prepared the wood. She's only manipulating things over the fire.
So the spring roll gets in warm water for a minute till it put it on your plate, and then you fill it with lettuce, plum sauce, noodles, pork, seaweed, carrots, smoked tofu, or
So some of the meals were pretty elaborate. The most important meal of the day, of course, was cowboy coffee first thing in the morning. And we had a lot of variety: pad thai, sometimes dessert, chili. We did a lot of baking in the reflector oven: scones, biscuits, cornbread. We divided food by boat, so each team had 6 breakfasts and 6 dinners to cook for the whole crew, and then individually we did lunches on our own. When you're doing the food, you obviously have to consider weight and volume and fitting it in those blue bear barrels. But you also have to consider, are you going to provide yourself with enough calories and protein? And it's challenging. We also packed extra meals in case weather caused the plane to be delayed a day or more, picking us up. Pancakes were on the menu, and someone who shall not be named chose not to bring a spatula with the kitchen kit. So Matt, who is very good with a sharp blade, carved one out of a wood stirrer, and it works great. It was a real winner of a breakfast. Now, Isadora is practicing the art of barrel diving. It always seems that the food you want is somehow fallen to the very bottom of the barrel. The kitchen counter, the kitchen stove, the oft-used kitchen oven. We spent a fair amount of time lounging in camp after all the work was done, enjoying the scenery and each other and the ever-changing light. I felt like I could just stand there for hours and keep spinning around looking. We planned for taking multiple hikes and took 4 roughly half-day to full-day hikes. They began around 3,000 feet of elevation. The peaks were typically in the 500 to 6,500 foot of elevation, but we often gained only about 1,200 foot of elevation on the hikes. The going was slow. There's no trails, so you're bushwhacking the entire time, sometimes starting out through bogs and thick spruce forest to get to the open areas. The open areas look easy to hike from a distance, but when you get close, you find out that the scree that looks smooth is often wobbly, can be dangerous with deep holes in between, plenty enough to twist an ankle or worse. And then also the moss is quite challenging. There's a lot of moss in certain areas. This moss is incredibly thick and spongy. And this is how thick and spongy it is. That's about almost 18, 19, 20 inches. Woo-woo! Nice bedding. So it's nice bedding, but it also covers some of the scree, so it could be pretty dangerous. You've got to be very careful in your hiking. Now, forgive me, but I can't help this. Every time I see this picture, I have to say, the hills are alive with the sound of music. But seriously, the hikes were one of the absolute best aspects of the trip. And 1,200 feet gives you quite a good view. This was my favorite hike, which afforded us this view. So the rocks in the mountains were constantly amazing. There were so many different kinds and types and shapes and colors all together that looked like they were somehow formed many different ways, but all next to each other, like nowhere else I'd ever been. And there's a great story behind this landscape. And I've condensed and paraphrased the story from the Wild Rivers of the Yukon's Peel Watershed guidebook. The oldest sediments in the Peel Watershed are roughly 1.8 billion years old, deposited when all of the Earth's land masses were clumped together in the supercontinent called Rodinia. Rodinia began to split apart about 750 million years ago, and the Pacific Ocean began to form between the separating land masses. The Earth's crustal plates continued to move across the surface of the planet. Powered by the fiery engine of Earth's core heat, the plates travel at about the same rate that fingernails grow, about 2 to 5 centimeters a year. About 200 million years ago, the continental fragments began splitting apart and taking on the forms we recognize as continents today. The northern Yukon was then underwater. Grain by grain, sediments built up until they were 5 to 25 kilometers thick. Mountain building began around 175 million years ago, when North America began colliding with the oceanic plates off its west coast. The dense, heavy rock of the oceanic crust sank under the lighter layers of continental sediments, lifting sediments and forming hills and mountains along the edge of the continent. The ocean plate also acted as a conveyor belt, transporting volcanic islands and other chunks of land called terrains to the western edge of the continent. Here's an amazing photograph that we did not take. We didn't see this, but this shows you like sedimentary rock 90 degrees vertical. In a long protracted series of collisions, the terrains plastered themselves against the edges of the continent. Terrains might be fragments of ocean floor, remnants of subterranean volcanoes, chains of offshore islands, or pieces of ancient continents. And here's a line I love. It was a messy undertaking. The continued pressure compressed thick layers of sedimentary rock into folds. Stiff layers of limestone broke apart and were stacked upon each other like pancakes. Older rocks were pushed over the top of younger ones, explaining why the Yukon's oldest rocks ended up high in the mountains. The continent continues drifting westward, forcing its way over the leading edge of the Pacific Ocean floor. This pressure is responsible for the high level of seismic activity in the Peel Watershed, one of the most tectonically active parts of the Yukon. In 1940, a magnitude 6.5 earthquake rocked the mountains here. The beauty can also be appreciated in extreme close-up. Fireweed is Yukon's territorial flower. It's a hardy plant that grows all over the Yukon from mid-July to September. And here on the site of a 2019 fire. I've attempted to identify some of the plants we enjoyed. This is lichen, possibly British soldier lichen, crinkled snow lichen, northern reindeer lichen, I'm a lichen lover, Cladonia coccifera lichen, and forgive any and all mispronunciations I've done tonight. Monkshood, or wolfsbane, is a species of highly toxic flowering plant. Cloudberry, unidentified. One-flowered cinquefoil. This Dr. Seussian-like flower seemed to be at every campsite and often in our food. It's Arctic cottongrass. So canoe tripping is physically renewing, emotionally refreshing, invigorating, sometimes competitive, fun, relaxing, spiritually nourishing. And there's also laundry, and bathing, and rinsing, and quaffing of various sorts and styles. Grooming came in various forms, sometimes with trepidation, but no one was exempt. By the last day together on the river, we knew each other pretty well. So the otter arrives to pick us up, piloted by our very able crew, piloting a very old plane, serial number 10, built February 20th, 1953. Reassuring to know that it was restored only 14 years ago. I'm told taken apart completely, including all the rivets. I found this sign very interesting. And there were plenty of mosquitoes to be squashed, I'll tell you. So on our 19th night on the rivers, our last night, we met Micah from Berlin. He had started out a couple of days after us and had been following us the whole way, paddling alone in his inflatable canoe. He was out solo for, I believe, 45 days. We had dinner together, shared stories, camped together on the gravel bar, and we knew we were leaving before he'd be awake the next morning. So we said we're going to be a mile and a half down the river, waiting for the bush plane. You know, we're going to have breakfast there, stop there, and have coffee with us. So he did. He stopped there, and we had coffee. He fished with Isadora some. He was an expert fisherman, and visited, and then it was time for him to set sail for the rest of his journey. Can anyone see anything wrong with this photograph as he's about to paddle away from us?
No life jacket.
Pardon me?
No life jacket.
You got it. Right away. You got it right away. No life jacket. Exactly. So this is him the night before, and this is him paddling away. So he was probably half a mile or more down the river when one of us happened to see the life jacket on the ground in front of us and realized what had happened. And we feared for his safety, of course. He didn't have a backup. So we made a suggestion, we came up with an idea. But first I'll ask, does anyone see anything wrong with this photograph? There's a life jacket outside the plane window! So we had suggested to the pilot, can we, fly low and see if we can find him and throw it out the window if we do? And the pilot said, we can do that. And we flew low and we found him and circled back and he threw it out the window. We found out a month or more later that by email that in fact he got it and was extremely grateful, obviously. And we felt so much better for him. So now we're back at Mayo Airport, back in the comfort of a service economy. And I will tell you that the lemonade and popcorn did not last long. We camped there overnight. We had a buffer day in case our plane had been delayed. So some people might be interested in knowing about the costs. The total shared costs were roughly $12,000 and change. If you divide that by the 6 people, that's a little over $2,000. You add in your flights from Toronto and some incidentals for bear spray and food and such, and you come out to about $3,200 a person, which is likely $3,000 or more less than if it had been a guided trip. So some ask, why do we do this? For each of us, there are different reasons, different answers, but here are a few things of what's in our hearts. We are seeking beauty, quiet, and stillness, seeking the experience of being awestruck, wanting a bit more self-reliance, needing desperately a separation and disconnection from some aspects of modern life, desiring remoteness, needing intimacy with nature and creation, and participating inescapably in a very present, be here now lifestyle. And with that, I conclude and open it for any questions you may have. Yes, it was July, what did we launch, 15th? 15th to August 5th, I believe, roughly. And the water temperature, you know, we didn't have a thermometer. I think it was probably around 45 degrees in Elliott Creek and most of the Hart River, and I think the Peel was somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees warmer than that. So maybe 55 degrees, something like that. Yeah. How long did it take us to prepare? I would say on and off little bits from January through the trip. And for different ones of us, different amounts, because Isadora, being the trip leader, had a lot of preparation, making contacts with the outfitter, making contacts with the bush plane, air company and such. So I would say dozens upon dozens of hours. But I couldn't quantify it beyond that, I don't think. Terry, you might have an idea.
Well, we started in October for next summer's trip. We're doing plans for next summer's trip. And we started, we're doing emails, so October.
9 months in advance. There was another question over here? Yeah. Ooh, if you're late for the bush plane. You might be sitting there for days waiting for another opening, and you might be spending a lot more money. I actually can't answer that question knowledgeably. Do you know, Terry?
That's never happened to me, but we've been where the bush plane can't come and pick you up for the longest was 5 days. We had to wait until the weather was good to fly. So we had communication with them, with the inReach. So we could say yes, we're here, and they could say yes, we're on our way. So.
Yeah, some of these places are much more iffy. Some of the places that you can fly into and paddle are more iffy than others in terms of the weather and how it might affect your bush plane flights. Any other questions? Yes?
What was the maximum depth of the water?
I don't really know. The Elliott Creek was typically, waist high or less, sometimes over your head. The Hart River, I would just be guessing to say that I don't think they're terribly deep.
It was just really fast.
Yes.
How are you prepared for potential grizzly encounters?
I'm sorry, say again, please.
How are you prepared for potential grizzly encounters? Like, how did you prepare? What would you have done?
I've spoken. Oh, grizzly bears. Yes, good question. Well, we tried to stay together in groups when we were out, except, of course, if you're, doing your business, so to speak, in the morning or whatever. You would hike together in groups. You would make noise, try and make noise. You could either sing or talk loudly, or. But we always had bear spray. Everybody had a can of bear spray on a holster or somehow attached to your person, so that you could use it if a bear looked like they were going to not go the other way and be a problem. Yeah, we talked about the possibility of having a gun, and on other trips, Terry's husband Matt has brought a gun and had to use it actually. But for whatever reason, we didn't end up. He didn't end up choosing to bring one on this trip. The trip we're going on next summer, you're not allowed to take one into the territory, so we'll just be having bear spray and singing together a lot. Yes?
Were you wearing wetsuits or dry suits?
We wore a variety of different, I think probably 3 of us, if I remember right, had dry suits on. And some of us had just dry bottoms on and maybe a dry top, but the 2-piece variety. And sometimes I think people might have paddled without either, once we got to the warmer water. But for the most part, dry suits. Yeah, I would wear a dry suit each time I go. Yes?
What did you use for photography here?
Let's see, relied heavily on the cell phones and a little waterproof point and shoot. Rob had a mirrorless Sony rangefinder. I forget the model of it, I'm sorry. I have a Sony, I think it's another mirrorless camera with quite a long zoom lens on it. I think it's 25-to-1 optical zoom. And the drones, and the 3 GoPros. Yes?
So where's your next trip planned? Paddling?
Then the next trip that we are planning, and one of our 2 lead paddlers is here with us, Terry, is on the Broken Skull and the Nahanni Rivers. And those are in the Northwest Territories. So I believe it's a couple of 100 miles east of where we were before, pretty much. That will be a roughly, I think it's 300 miles, isn't it, of paddling? I think, something like that. This was 190, I think that one's about 300. So it'll be just under 4 weeks of paddling. That one's a little trickier logistically. This one we could fly to, rent the canoes there, and work with the outfitter. For the Broken Skull and the Nahanni trips, there's outfitters up there, but they won't rent you canoes, at least this year, unless you're having them guide you down. And we didn't want to do a guided trip. We wanted to do self-guided. We couldn't find anybody to rent us canoes, so Terry is actually driving the canoes up, and Matt will be driving them back. Some of us are flying there. Pam and I will be driving there. It's about a 7-day drive. But we're going to take roughly 2 months to drive back. So it's considered to be one of the bucket list trips in Canada for paddlers, the Nahanni. Terry and Matt have actually done it before. We've never done it.
Is it also whitewater and flatwater?
It is, yeah, the Broken Skull portion has, I think, almost continuous whitewater, or much more continuous whitewater. It's not extremely challenging, I don't think, from what I've read. The Nahanni is a lot more flat water, but very fast moving. It also has whitewater. It's not technical, but some of it's quite big, meaning big, big waves. Correct me if I'm wrong, you've done it. Anything to... Yeah, okay. Any other questions? Yes? Ooh, well, I've been paddling since I was a kid, really, but well, I paddled canoe flatwater until about roughly 10 years ago. And I only got into whitewater by accident. I never thought I'd become interested in whitewater. But I actually started paddling sea kayaks with the ADK and wanted to get paddling lessons. And the paddling lessons that I could get when I wanted them were done by a trainer named Art Miller, who did a lot of whitewater instruction. And so I started paddling with all these whitewater folks while I was getting instruction, and it just kind of got me interested in whitewater kayaking and playboating to some extent. And then I thought, maybe I love canoe tripping, maybe I'd like whitewater tripping. So then I went up to a school in Ontario called Madawaska Canoe Center and took a week-long tandem canoe whitewater paddling class. And then I started looking for places to paddle and people to paddle with. I found it difficult. There's a lot of people down here paddling whitewater in kayaks, and a lot of people paddling flatwater in canoes. I couldn't find whitewater canoe trippers to paddle with here. Not that they're not here, but I just wasn't connecting with them. So I heard about a group in Canada called the Wilderness Canoe Association in Toronto. And I went up there and I joined. They have an annual meeting and they have trips all throughout the paddling season. And I've been a member now for 5 or 6 years or more. And actually the first trip I took through them was when I met Matt and Terry, who are from Naples. But I met them through the Wilderness Canoe Association in Toronto. Anyone else? Well, if you never thought you'd be interested in whitewater paddling, think again, because it's a lot of fun. And by the way, this trip, if you were really interested in pure whitewater, you probably wouldn't take this trip, because there's much more challenging whitewater than this for whitewater paddlers. And Jim knows some of this too. Jim's been on a lot of whitewater paddling trips as well. But it's one of the most beautiful and one of the most remote and least traveled, which is why we chose that one.
Thanks very much. We appreciate it very much for coming. Thanks. Jeff will hang around just a little bit for questions if you want to connect with him.